Yo, in this video, I hope to alleviate any anxiety or fear you may have of Risen Shagaru Magala, and if you don't have any of those scary emotions, I hope to bring a greater understanding of his fight and maybe help you in any future hunts against him. Alright, so let's get into the boring hit zone stuff. So the head hit zone is just vastly better than every other part of the body. And then our element of choice is going to be dragon in this instance, except if we are running like a elemental bowgun of some kind, then we'll have to run fire since we don't have a way of reliably shooting a decent dragon element, right? Since focusing the face is our best bet here in terms of damage, this video will be centered around that idea mostly. You might prefer to focus hind legs or tail due to the feeling of safety, but if our goal is to successfully complete a hunt, especially solo, we need all the damage we can get to end the hunt as quick as we can. The more time we spend in a hunt just leads to more potential to make mistakes, right? By no means am I saying we should speedrun, but we should be at least aiming for around a 10 to 15 minute completion. This guide will detail strategies that don't involve evasion boosting skills, but I will go over those and other skills later on as well. Now that we've gone over the boring numbers, let's discuss our general positioning and then go into some moves and behavior that we should look out for. And I will say now that Risen Shagaru will be the ultimate test of understanding your weapon and figuring out how to interact with them in a relatively safe manner. In this fight, we're going to find ourselves relatively in three positions: kinda far, mid, and up close, or what I like to call it, the danger zone, which is like a duh moment, right? But with this fight, you'll be in and out of these positions a lot and you can't really control it. You kind of just have to deal with it, and more often than not, you will find yourself in that mid and danger zone position. When we are in this mid position and even the danger zone too, the main thing we need to look out for are his wing arm slaps. These attacks are the source of a lot of grief and are often how Shagaru will attempt to really get his attacks going. These wing arm attacks are quick, they have far reach, and of course, are also followed up by AoEs that vary depending on his current state. What we want to do is somehow find a way to deal with these attacks, because once we get through these wing arm attacks that kind of act as an opener, we are able to deal with other attacks that can usually be dealt with easier. So we have the option of spacing ourselves, blocking, countering, or maybe even iframing through these attacks. If we opt to space ourselves, we still run the risk of getting hit by AoEs, in which case we need to position ourselves out of harm's way. We'll likely still find ourselves in that mid position and we can start to react to the next attack. Every other option will probably put us in that danger zone, which is fine, but we need to keep in mind that we're going to have to react well for certain success. Now, I call this the danger zone because at this position, we're at the mercy of whatever Shagaru has in store for us, and generally we don't want to overstay our welcome here, but we will find ourselves here time and time again, and we have to have the correct judgment of knowing when we need to actually enter it or when we need to actually leave it and escape it. Factors can include our wire butt count, the weapon we're even using, how much HP we have at that time, and a lot of other things as well. There is a lot of value that can be gained from being into this zone, but there's also a lot of value that can be lost when we enter this zone because things can go south so quick that it's not even funny. An extremely quick charge forward. So long as we aren't standing directly in front of him, a simple roll should get us out of the way just fine. A more telegraph charge. This attack has an amazing hitbox, and depending on your position, you could actually opt to just squeeze in between his raised hand and body. You can also maneuver to either side. Just keep in mind that his raised hand does go in front of his body during the animation as if to kind of smack you, and that is an attack too with a pretty decent range. You can also go for a counter, but keep in mind once again where you're actually positioned at. If by the raised hand, you can just counter the hand and be fine, but if you're in front of him and the hand won't hit you, you have to actually wait for his physical body, his chest, to make contact with you because his face isn't actually a part of the attack. This move is pretty quick. but as long as you're moving, it's pretty easy to avoid, and the actual attack itself doesn't really do much of anything. It's the repositioning that Shagaru does afterwards that we actually have to look out for. And just an important note, that if he ever does reposition himself, whether it's from this move or just in general, it's not usually just for fun, and that there is probably something that's going to come out of it, and so you should expect something and try to react accordingly. This is extremely similar to the previous move and typically serves as a kind of get away from me sort of thing, which is why I call it the fade version of this move. And once again, it's a repositioning thing, so he's usually setting himself up for a next attack. This is an attack that usually comes out after Shagaru repositions himself. Avoiding this move is actually very easy, just maybe not upon first glance. So you want to actually move diagonally towards him because the projectile is too big and too quick to just kind of rush at him dead on. Avoiding this move might take a bit of practice, but it is very easy, and we actually do have an opportunity to attack after this, though it does vary depending on how far we are from him. This is very clearly telegraphed. In the event that we're hard into the danger zone and we're underneath Shagaru, we should still have time to move away. And in the case that we do opt to play into our counters or shield, we do have to keep in mind that unlike Gore or Chaotic, that these AoEs are all actually individual hits, meaning that depending on where we stand at when he uses this attack, we could potentially block one explosion and then immediately get hit with another, meaning we can't just blindly counter the attack. But after this attack, we are given an opportunity to retaliate that we need to keep in mind and kind of learn whichever weapon we're using, how we can exploit this tiny bit of opportunity. This is one of 3 dives Shagaru can do. It's important to have good wire bug management because this move on its own is really hard to avoid through pure positioning, and you honestly kind of have to have the foresight to see it coming to set yourself up properly, right? Which is why I would generally just advise trying to block, counter, or iframe through it. But do keep in mind though that the actual hit itself is kind of delayed due to the fact that he does sort of turn when he's hitting the ground, or maybe even before then, right? So you do have to condition yourself to kind of wait a little bit longer if you're trying to go for a counter. But once he does pull this off though, depending on where you're at, you can actually position him because he does take a short break, but it's generally not always feasible. It just kind of depends on what's going on for you at that time. Keeping the air in mind, we can go into his flight. So whenever Shagaru does take flight, there is a wind pressure that's generated, just like many monsters, and getting caught in this wind pressure is bad because of the potential follow-ups that can come from it. Now, typically, Shagaru will kind of spit forward an easy projectile to avoid. You just simply roll to the left, right? And if you are caught in this wind, you can just block it or generally just roll last minute, right? It's after this projectile that you do have to look out for it, because if you're kind of like mid to far away, that positioning we talked about earlier, he'll do a very quick spin and dive towards you, which you can answer pretty easily by, once again, just rolling towards either side. But you do have to keep in mind though that sometimes he will skip that initial first projectile, which is why it can be bad to get caught into that wind pressure, because if he takes flight and then immediately dives forward, if you don't have a shield to use the block or some sort of insta counter of any kind, then you generally are going to get hit because you couldn't set yourself up to avoid that dive to begin with. And if you do opt to play directly underneath him, he'll instead just decide to shoot Frenzy, sort of similar to a move talked about prior, where he'll shoot frenzied AoEs around his body, which is generally pretty easy to get away from, and it's easy to not have even occur at all. Just don't play close to him. Shagaru will spawn frenzy AoEs on both the left and right side of the player that are delayed and intended to stop the player from escaping his next move. And this is the last dive Shagaru Magala has. It is telegraphed very similarly to the slow dive bomb, but it comes out similar to the other dive bomb that is a lot quicker. And it does not feature that turnaround and pause that comes from the slower dive. So we kind of have 2 dives we're dealing with at once, and we can't punish him from it either. So just avoid the move and keep any follow-ups in mind. These attacks have an amazing hitbox, and for a lot of weapons, you don't actually have to roll to even escape from it, giving you a chance to kind of recover or even save stamina. The triple slam does initially allow you to punish after the third slam, but I believe after maybe 30 to 40% of HP, it is followed up by the next move that we'll talk about.
Also, another thing to keep in mind is that with this move, the explosions that come out afterwards, if you block the hand, you actually don't have to worry about them. But do keep it in mind in case you do move slightly and the hand misses you, you still do have to block those explosions because those will still hit you.
This move is very telegraphed and often, but not always, a follow-up attack. Now, before Risen Form, this attack is very dumb easy. You just block it, walk away, counter it, do whatever you want to do, right? And before Risen Form, but Enraged, it's still very easy to deal with, but we do have to be careful of the follow-up explosions after the initial slam, since they can still hurt us because they're not like a packaged deal. When he's in his Risen Form, this attack becomes a bit more complicated due to the delayed AoEs. So when we deal with this move, we can still counter the initial attack, but we have to make sure we have an answer to the follow-up hit that spawns immediately on his face. And if we don't have an answer for that second attack, then we have to keep that in mind and maybe just not get hit by this big slam to begin with, just by either running away from the slam or running towards the left or towards the right side. Now, I think it is very important to learn how to punish this move, because this is our biggest damage opportunity, and any big punishes we have that are a bit lengthier are going to be after this attack in particular. This move seems very scary, but it is very, very easy to avoid. Aside from the fact that it has an absurdly long telegraph, it can be even further telegraphed by the big ass back hop Shagaru does to set himself up for it. There is a very tiny opportunity to punish, but due to the necessary movement to evade, it's hard to land a blow on the face. So this is probably one of the few times where I will say, go for the back legs. This is a move that could require good wire bug management. It's hard, but not impossible to get away from with just pure positioning and rolling. It is telegraphed, so a good counter, block, or iframe will serve you well, but in the unfortunate opportunities that those aren't necessarily an option, I would recommend trying to move towards his face or tail to try and get away from that move. He does move a very good distance towards the player, so if you are trying to just roll away from him in the same direction that he's moving, you'll very likely get hit unless you are already a good distance away to begin with. This is a very quick and snappy move, and if we're just going off the pure attack, is kind of unreactable. And this move alone is why I say we can't overcommit to opportunities to attack, and why we have to learn when we have to enter and exit that danger zone. Good wire bug management will keep us alive in case we do get grabbed, because if we get grabbed, if we don't wire fall, there's no way to get away from this move. We'll literally be locked on the ground and we gotta watch ourselves die. If you feel this attack coming out and you don't have an immediate counter or response of some kind and you just have to position away from it, simply move towards Shagaru's left side. Don't move towards him, just move hard left. The tracking on this attack is too strong to try and roll in any other direction, but if we try to move left and maybe even roll, if our weapon's a bit slower, we can get away from this move very, very easily. Now, in the chance that you do decide to kind of counter and not even just regularly block, do keep in mind that this grab is a bit delayed, and so you might have to counter a bit later than what you might think. This move we can also punish afterwards, but due to the fact that if we aren't using an immediate counter of some kind and we opt to walk away from it, that we might not have that opportunity to really exploit him, right? This move is very telegraphed. If you're in neutral or aren't doing anything, if you input a sheath, you'll come out of the roar animation with your weapon away, making avoiding this move extremely simple. You just simply gotta maneuver out, maybe even dive if you feel comfortable doing that. The explosion itself is unblockable without guard up, I believe, but it does do a lot of damage, so if you don't have the HP, I wouldn't bother trying to block it. But if you are a little unhinged, dare I say even insane, you can try to counter the explosion, maybe with Swax as an example, amp up your sword, and so when he's on the ground, because after this attack, you get a very huge opportunity to do damage. You'll have an amp sword and you'll be able to follow up or something after that, right? The last move that I want to talk about is a move that does seem pretty frightening, but And this advice definitely is easier said than done. It seems very, yeah, duh-ish, but you really just have to position yourself either out of it or just within it. The AoEs are not any bigger than what they look like, but they definitely aren't any smaller. And, as long as we're kind of not keeping ourselves right in this guy's face when we don't need to be, we can react to this move pretty easily and kind of just take a step back and kind of maneuver ourselves where we feel like we want to be at, right? And then if he's in his risen form, he does it twice over. And if we see that first one, then we should definitely be positioning ourselves to avoid the second one too, right? And an interesting property with this move is that after he does this attack, there is a follow-up of a kind, but it is not a guaranteed specific one follow-up. It can mix up depending on where we position at. And depending on where we positioned at, we talked about it earlier, being far, mid, or in that danger zone, will factor which move we get. So if we are further away, you should expect that kind of frenzied spit, right, which we just move diagonally to avoid. Very easy, right? For kind of mid, we could expect the slow dive, which, we talked about having to have good wire bug management. It is kind of hard to get away from, right? But if we do know it's coming, then we could kind of set ourselves up to avoid it, right? Or if we're particularly close, we'll see that frenzied burst kind of move, in which case we could, since we are baiting it out, we could counter it and maybe even follow up after that, right? So just keep all that in mind when you do see this move occur. If you have trouble avoiding that slow dive, maybe stick close to him, get really far away so you can react to it, right? Or get a different outcome entirely. He also can do a shoulder check as well if you are close. I just couldn't get footage of it, and I really didn't want to hunt for one specific move, but take my word for it. So I've gone over some moves saying position this, position that, wirebug this, and that, and all of that is easier said than done, and only practice will make all of that second nature. So to make this fight easier, let's go over some skills that will, make this life a lot easier for us. Alright, so let's just get this out the way. No defense boost 7, and I'm not hearing you out. Bigger defense is great, sure, on paper, but having 1,000 defense for an attack to hurt a lot, but not a whole lot, isn't really worth the investment. Now, I'm not going to tell you to run Mail of Hellfire, though you should consider it, but I will tell you that there are other ways of improving our survivability. Earlier, I talked about positioning, and we could look into boosting our rolls using Evade Extender or maybe even Evade Window to make repositioning easier or allow us to have reliable iframes. By boosting our evasion, those opportunities to deal damage could maybe be exploited further because we can commit harder since we have a better option of backing out. Maybe we run more guard, although depending on what you use, you probably already have it maxed out. We could run Embolden alongside it to boost our guard even further, removing or reducing chip damage and keeping us out of that annoying block stun. We could also maybe run Blood Right and maybe even Blood Awakening just so we can leech HP back and reduce how often we have to manually stop and heal ourselves. The point of this is to say that there's more to surviving than just a boost and a number, and with this in mind, we still do need to run attack boosting skills too, because if we invest too many points into comfort, it'll reduce our damage too heavily, and once again, the longer our hunt is, that means there's more opportunities to make mistakes and maybe fail. Other skills to consider are Bloodlust and Frenzied Bloodlust at the same time, which seems scary, but the wire bug to be gained from completing Bloodlust is worth considering. We could also maybe even look at Wirebug Whisperer too, so we can hold on to Wirebugs we pick up a bit longer. There are other skills that we can maybe run too. It really just depends on us. There are a lot of resources out there that'll kind of help you make a build for your weapon, so maybe search those out and then consider that survivability aspect once again, and make whatever we need to make sure that we don't die, right? Last but not least, let's go over the laser and the little mini game that comes with. So like many monsters, Shagaru has a mechanic that, when overcame, gives a free knockdown, and when the player takes too long, they're punished accordingly. When he's enraged or enters his risen form, the process soon begins. The frenzy will gradually build up in his mouth, and after reaching its limit, Shagaru will unleash a laser after attacks or even repositioning. And this mechanic is why I encourage a playstyle that involves attacking its face, not necessarily because the laser is scary, but because it leads to a free opportunity to deal even more damage. And what's nice is that even if he does get the laser still off, we can actually still get the knockback. A thing to consider when going against a laser is if you're using a shielded weapon of some kind, maybe consider running guard up, because when he's using the laser, he's not moving, and that's a free opportunity to deal damage, especially if we can react to it well, right? So
keep that in mind, and when he's in risen form, the laser does grow in size and he actually does slide backwards, which can make punishing it a bit difficult, but depending on where you're positioning at, not impossible. The general flow of the fight, I think, is sort of like this. The start is kind of okay, but due to the quick enrage, it goes down a bit, and then risen form is, yeah. So our goal is to make the line kind of flat, but it takes a lot of time and effort, and most people just don't want to do that, and that's completely understandable. Get your attack forward and crit forward and maybe an augment or two and just keep it moving. But I really enjoy this fight a lot, and I don't think there's really anything out there that tries to help people deal and maybe learn this fight. And so I figured, why don't I try to give it a shot, right? Seeing as this is the first video I've really poured a lot of effort into, I don't expect this to do numbers, but I do hope that whoever this reaches takes something away from this, and maybe your next runs against Risen Shagaru are better. I used to hate this monster a lot myself, but I've been swayed after learning how to take him on with longsword, and soon after I practiced other weapons as well. I also do plan on making a hopefully shorter video going over the hazard version and what to look out for with that one, but I'm not too pressed since I believe most people would just run maybe the level 270 version of him if they really did need thick blood. In classic YouTube fashion, like, comment, sub, and share with all your hunting friends, and maybe check out my Twitch too.